Welcome back. And now it's time to take a look at today's press. And we're honored to have with us Ethar El-Katatney, journalist. Good morning to you, Ethar.
Good morning to you.
Let's start with Al-Ahram newspaper, the front page of Al-Ahram. This is the main heading of Al-Ahram's front page, and it reads, the first confrontation between the MPs and the government. Head of the Presidential Bureau, Dr. Zakaria Azmi, refuses the Minister of Health decision to turn the public hospitals to investing ones. Municipalities' corruption causes losses of £4.5 billion. How do you read this headline?
I think it's actually very interesting because, in the past 2 weeks, there's also been a lot of discussion over the psychiatric hospital in Abbasiyya and how the ministry is planning to relocate it to 80 kilometers outside the city. So a lot of people, there's been protests over decisions of the Ministry of Health that they're putting investors' concerns over the people. So I know that in this session, the interest was the idea that instead of having subsidies for people who do, who are sick and they go to hospitals and they get free treatment, to actually make them pay. So I really don't think it's actually going to happen because health in Egypt is one of the most important subsidies and most important issues. But it's interesting that Ahram put this as their main heading versus the president who met the Kenyan and the vice president, that they put this as their first
Well, speaking of the president, the second most important heading in the front page of Al-Ahram reads, after President Hosni Mubarak's meeting with Zambian president and Kenyan vice president, Kenya says that Nile Basin countries are ready to share the Nile waters. Mubarak met with his Zambian counterpart, Rupia Banda, in Cairo on Tuesday, and the two leaders reviewed the challenges facing Africa as well as means of boosting bilateral relations. Later, President Mubarak held talks with Kenyan Vice President, and the meeting discussed means of enhancing bilateral ties in different fields, as well as discussing major challenges facing Africa. Of course, Ethar, you know that the water issue has been running for quite a long time. So through your readings, how do you see now this very important meeting?
Well, it's actually what's interesting here is that the discussion that both the Zambian president and the Kenyan vice president, they made sure to emphasize the fact that they wouldn't take any agreements that would be against the interests of Egypt, that they care very much about making sure that our access to the water remains, which, because we've had some difficulties over, some countries doing their own agreement because we're not being accommodating enough, so that they're very much firmly, in our side, and that we want to reach an agreement where all the countries who do make use of the Nile, that they all reach the same agreement.
So this is a very important meeting. Hopefully that will come up with more important decisions later.
Yeah, and they didn't, they also discussed a lot of bilateral agreements, not just the water, of how African countries we want to work together.
Which is the key, Ethar, if you think about it, this is the key. If you boost your relations with other African countries, that would facilitate agreements in other areas, such as the water, for example.
And other challenges,
Of course. Also the front page, amid escalation in conflict over the power in Iran, that sits. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad intends to fire ministers of intelligence and defense. The power conflict between Ahmadinejad's conservative supporters and their reformist rivals has risen following corruption accusations against the president's political advisors. Now, this is, of course, this takes place in a very important area in Al-Ahram's front page, which indicates its importance. So how do you read it?
Also the Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa, also on Sunday, when he was talking about Israeli agreements and weapons of mass destruction, he mentioned, the stance that the U.S. is taking towards Iran and how we should take a similar stance towards Israel's weapons and how they're dealing. So it's interesting that they didn't mention that here, but as far as I can see, we've been hearing the same, he's been doing the same kind of actions, and we'll see if it actually translates into something on the ground.
Okay, so we'll just have to see
what happens.
Wait and see, yes. And still covering Al-Ahram's front page, Sharm el-Sheikh beaches, Sharm el-Sheikh beaches resume normal activities, but no conditions, just as not to feed fish and not to dive without a diving guide. Now, of course, what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh was very unusual. The shark attacks, that was very unusual. What I've heard is that the Egyptian authorities asked for help from experts and specialists in that area who came up with certain theories. But now Sharm el-Sheikh is back.
Yes.
Since we are celebrating the holidays, and this is the high season for Sharm el-Sheikh. So
and you also know that surprisingly the weather suddenly turned back into summer, so tourism is, people are still there. What I think is also interesting here is that the media coverage, you know, in the very beginning it was covered in a very sensationalist way, you know, sharks are attacking and everything, but I think the way they're dealing with it now hopefully will be back to normal and no more sharks and no more conspiracy theories over why we had sharks.
Okay, there is also an important heading here in the middle of Al-Ahram's front page, and it reads, the Arab League chief Amr Moussa discusses with Sudanese President al-Bashir means of implementing the comprehensive peace agreement. The Secretary General visits Juba today and offers or presents 10 medical clinics as a gift from the Arab League. How do you read it?
Yeah, very much, you know, because if we have the referendum on January 9th between southern Sudan and northern Sudan, and if the South secedes, I think this is very important. Egypt cares very much, you know, our relations with Sudan. And what's interesting here is that the president, you know, Bashir, he made sure to mention that if the South does decide to secede, that the brotherly relation between the two countries will still remain very strong, and that they'll be one of their first supporters. So he did say that he'll offer the 10 mobile clinics, and also, you know, the comprehensive, how the peace agreement, how it will turn out. And I think there's around, 60 observers now. Everyone's, you know, the referendum is going to be very closely watched to see what actually happens.
Actually, Moussa kicked off the 3-day visit to Khartoum on Tuesday, and he held a meeting with the Sudanese Vice President Ali Osman Taha to review the latest preparations ahead of the January 9th referendum, as he mentioned, on the independence of South Sudan. And the Arab League chief also held talks with Sudanese Foreign Minister Ali Kirti to follow up the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement. I believe that this visit is very timely now. It comes at a very critical time. And since we are still in Al-Ahram's front page now, I found a very interesting heading that reads, a stormy session at the Kuwaiti Parliament. The MPs protest over the existence of security forces outside the parliament, and Kuwaiti opposition lawmakers filed a motion against the prime minister on Tuesday in a political standoff that may prompt the ruler of the OPEC member to reshuffle the cabinet or dissolve parliament. There it is. How do you read it?
I don't, you know, this happened before and the cabinet wasn't reshuffled, so you know, they're protesting, but whether or not it actually happens also, we'll still have to wait and see.
Okay. Why don't we go to Al-Akhbar newspaper? That's enough with Al-Ahram. If we go to Al-Akhbar front page. Judicial sources say that the master spy in a fictional character fabricated by the suspect to justify his shameful crime. The espionage story also was covered in a sensational way, just like the sharks event.
But you know, it's a story that needs to be sensational, especially since in May we also had, you know, 2 Israelis were captured where they part of the same ring, so it's a story. But I think they said here that it wasn't, that this is fictional, the idea that Al-Ustad, you know, of having the ringleader, it wasn't true, and it's also, I think, the front page of Al-Masri Al-Yawm today.
Why don't we check it out? Yes, there it is.
Yeah, it's also the cover. Yeah, to justify, you know, the crime.
Yes, the professor character is fictional. No other Egyptian
are involved. No other
spies involved in the case.
There was a Syrian businessman.
Okay. And still with Al-Akhbar, the People's Assembly amends the law of practicing political rights and raises the award of Sinai Star. Minister of Health Hatem Al-Gabali stresses that the ministry has no intention to drop the free treatment or sell the Abbasiyah hospital. We were just talking about this earlier. How do you read it?
I don't think they can actually, you know, even though the rumors are that they want to move it away because it's such a prime location and they want the Cairo Expo, the exhibition to be there. I know that the World Health Organization actually has a law that says that no mental patient, a hospital should be available to him within 20 minutes, that it shouldn't take him longer than that to actually reach the hospital. So if they move it to 80 kilometers out, it's actually not only against this kind of law, but it also will increase stigma. You know, we're sending them far away into the desert, so I don't think it'll actually move. And there's been, like, the protests during the last couple of weeks since think it was Al-Dastur that actually talked about the rumor first. So I think the fact that what's interesting also is the preemptive action of the employees to actually go on strike and say we don't want this before any official announcement has been made. So this, shows the initiative and how we're actually, whenever anything, people take a stance and they say their opinion right away. So hopefully they won't move it. Hopefully.
And this actually took place, Ethar, in many other aspects. For example, the issue of making schools experimental, the private schools in Alexandria. And the people took stand, and the students took stand, and everyone. So this is, this is ringing a bell. People now, the awareness is being raised, and people can express their opinions.
Definitely.
I'm not trying to to provoke
to tell people go strike.
Demonstrations or no, but you can still express your right in a very peaceful way, in a very respectful manner, according to your legislative rights. So this is, I guess, what the people have been doing now. So this is a sign of democracy. This is a healthy sign.